Have you ever sat alone in a quiet house, wondering when your children will call? Wondering if they even think about you? You spent years, decades, raising them, giving them everything you had, sacrificing your own wants and needs to make sure they had a good life. And now, the silence feels heavier than ever. The phone doesn't ring as often. The visits are fewer. And the worst part? That feeling deep in your heart, the one that whispers, "Did they forget me? Do I even matter anymore?" It's a pain that's hard to put into words, a loneliness that settles into your bones. But listen to me, you are not forgotten. You are not powerless. Your worth is not measured by how often someone calls or visits. It's time to stop waiting for someone else to give you the love and respect you deserve. It's time to reclaim it for yourself. Because here's the truth, when you stand in your own power, when you find joy in your own life, the world takes notice. Even those who once drifted away may begin to return. But it all starts with you. Today, I want to share something with you, not just advice, but wisdom. Real stories, real steps that will help you find peace, dignity, and even respect again. By the end of this, I hope you'll walk away feeling not just heard, but empowered. Because your worth is not in their hands, it's in yours. And it's time to start living like it. 1. Don't react in anger. Pause and then reflect. The pain of feeling ignored by your own children cuts deep. You gave them everything, your time, your energy, your love. And now, the silence feels unbearable. It's natural to feel anger rise within you, to want to shout, "How could you treat me like this after everything I've done for you?" But here's the hard truth, reacting in anger won't bring them closer. It will only push them further away. That's exactly what Mr. Tanaka, a retired school teacher, almost did. His son rarely called, and when he did, their conversations felt rushed and distant. One evening, after yet another unanswered phone call, Mr. Tanaka clenched his fists, ready to leave a harsh message. "Do you even care about me anymore?" But something inside him stopped. Instead of calling, he stepped outside and took a slow walk through the park. As he walked, memories flooded in, his years as a dedicated teacher, the sacrifices he made for his family, the joy he once felt just being himself. And suddenly, he saw his life differently. His worth wasn't tied to his son's phone call. His dignity wasn't something anyone could take from him. That moment of quiet reflection changed everything. Instead of resentment, he found peace. Instead of demanding attention, he decided to focus on himself. And over time, something incredible happened. His son noticed a change. He started calling more often, sensing something different in his father's voice. Mr. Tanaka had stopped chasing, stopped waiting in bitterness, and that shift made all the difference. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Emotional reactions rarely lead to positive outcomes. Anger may feel justified, but it doesn't solve the problem. It deepens it. When you lash out, you don't gain respect. You lose it. And more importantly, you lose your own inner peace. But when you pause, when you take a breath and reflect, you remind yourself of something crucial. You are still you. Your value is not dependent on anyone else's actions. The next time you feel that frustration bubbling up, stop. Take a walk. Reflect on the life you've built, the love you've given, the experiences that have shaped you. Remember that dignity is something you carry within yourself, not something others give you. And when you approach life with that kind of quiet strength, you'll be surprised at how people, including your own children, start responding differently. Calm reflection will always bring more clarity than anger ever will. 2. Rebuild your own life. Find a new purpose. One of the most powerful things you can do when you feel ignored or overlooked by your children is to shift your focus back to yourself. Instead of waiting for their attention, their calls, their visits, start rebuilding your own life with purpose. When you live a fulfilled, joyful life, your entire energy changes. You become someone people, including your children, are naturally drawn to. This is exactly what happened to Mrs. Elena, a widow in her late 60s. After her husband passed, her children started calling less and visiting even less frequently. At first, she waited by the phone, clinging to every small interaction, hoping that if she just stayed patient, they would realize how much she missed them. But weeks turned into months, and the loneliness became unbearable. Then, one morning, she decided she had enough. She reached into a kitchen drawer, pulled out a packet of seeds, and stepped into her neglected garden. What started as a simple way to pass the time quickly grew into a passion. She began planting flowers, tending to vegetables, and finding peace in watching life bloom around her. Soon, she joined a local gardening club, met new friends, and started sharing her harvest with neighbors. The change in her was undeniable. She smiled more, she had things to look forward to, and for the first time in years, she felt truly alive again. And then something unexpected happened. Her daughter called. "Mom, I've been thinking about you lately. You sound so happy these days. What's your secret?" That call led to more conversations, longer visits, and a deeper connection than before. Elena's children didn't return to her because she begged for their attention. They returned because they saw her as someone vibrant, someone full of life, someone they admired. This story holds a simple but powerful lesson. When your life has purpose, you become harder to ignore. Instead of waiting for your children to make you feel valued, take control of your own happiness. Pursue hobbies that excite you. Join a community group, volunteer, travel, do things that make your heart feel full. When you cultivate a life of joy and fulfillment, you radiate a new kind of energy, one that doesn't chase, doesn't cling, but instead attracts. People, including your children, will notice. And even if they don't return in the way you hoped, you will have already gained something far greater, a life that is truly your own. 3. Communicate your feelings wisely. When your children become distant, it's natural to feel hurt. You might find yourself asking, why don't they call? Do they even care? The pain of being ignored can make you want to lash out, to demand answers, to remind them of all the sacrifices you made. But here's something important to remember. Harsh words often lead to more distance, not closeness. The way you express your feelings can either build a bridge or burn one. Instead of confrontation, try a softer, wiser approach, one that invites connection rather than conflict. Take the story of Mr. Peterson, a retired carpenter who hadn't heard from his son James in months. Every day, he sat by the window, hoping to see his son's car pull into the driveway. The silence hurt him deeply, and with each passing day, resentment grew. One evening, he picked up the phone, ready to leave an angry message. "Why don't you ever call me? Have you forgotten about me?" But instead, he put the phone down and took a deep breath. That night, he sat at his kitchen table and wrote a letter instead. He didn't accuse, he didn't blame, he simply shared his heart. "James, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I miss our conversations. I miss hearing about your life. I just want you to know that I'm always here, and I'm proud of you, no matter what." A few days later, his phone rang. It was James. The letter had touched him deeply. He hadn't realized how much his father missed him. That single heartfelt message reignited their relationship, leading to regular phone calls and weekend visits that hadn't happened in years. This story carries a crucial lesson. The way you communicate determines whether your words heal or harm. If Mr. Peterson had acted out of frustration, demanding his son's attention, he likely would have pushed James further away. But by expressing his emotions with warmth and understanding, he created an opening for reconnection. Instead of saying, "Why don't you ever call me?" try saying, "I miss hearing your voice." Instead of accusing, "You never visit anymore," try inviting, "I'd love to see you soon." Words have power. When used with kindness and wisdom, they can soften hearts and rebuild broken bonds. So the next time you feel ignored, pause before reacting. Choose words that open doors, not close them. Because when you speak with love, you create the space for love to return. 4. Set healthy boundaries. As much as you love your children, respect is a two-way street. You deserve to be treated with kindness and consideration, but that starts with how you treat yourself. Too often, parents sacrifice everything, believing that by giving endlessly, they will earn their children's appreciation. But what happens when that generosity turns into expectation? When love is replaced with demands? If you never set boundaries, you may find yourself feeling used rather than valued. Setting healthy boundaries isn't about pushing your children away. It's about teaching them how to respect you, just as you respect them. Take the story of Mrs. Rosa, a retired nurse in her 70s. Her son, Daniel, had always leaned on her for help. At first, it was small things, watching the grandchildren for an hour, lending him a little money. But over the years, his requests grew. He would show up unannounced, expecting her to drop everything to babysit, run errands, or listen to his problems. And worst of all, he rarely said thank you. Mrs. Rosa, wanting to keep the peace, always said yes. Until one day, after yet another last-minute demand, she paused. She felt exhausted, unappreciated, and frustrated. So instead of agreeing, she took a deep breath and said, "Daniel, I love you, but I'm not available today. I've made plans for myself." At first, Daniel was surprised, even irritated. He wasn't used to hearing no, but Mrs. Rosa stayed firm. She started prioritizing her own time, joining a book club, attending yoga classes, and reconnecting with old friends. She stopped answering every request immediately and, for the first time, put herself first. And over time, something remarkable happened. Daniel began to realize that his mother wasn't just someone to turn to whenever he needed something. She was a person with her own life. He started showing more gratitude, treating her with more respect, and even asking, "Mom, do you need anything?" The lesson is simple. When you respect your own time and energy, others will too. If you allow your children to take you for granted, they will. But if you set clear, loving boundaries, you show them that your needs matter. Saying no doesn't mean you don't love them. It means you love yourself enough not to be drained. If your child only calls when they need something, it's okay to say, "I'd love to help, but I need some time for myself." If they are disrespectful, you can calmly say, "I won't be spoken to that way." When you stand firm with love, you teach them how to treat you. And in doing so, you regain not only their respect, but your own dignity and peace. 5. Lead by example. Respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you inspire. And one of the most powerful ways to earn respect from your children is by leading by example. How you carry yourself, how you treat others, and even how you respond to neglect or disrespect can teach them more than words ever could. If you want to be treated with kindness, show kindness. If you want to be valued, value yourself. The truth is, people, your children included, will eventually mirror the behavior you consistently model for them. Take the story of Mr. Lorenzo, a retired factory worker and grandfather of 5. As he grew older, he noticed a painful shift. His children visited less often, and when they did, they seemed distracted, glued to their phones, barely paying attention to him. It would have been easy to grow bitter, to lash out and remind them how much he had sacrificed for them. But instead, Mr. Lorenzo chose a different path. Every time they visited, no matter how brief or distracted they were, he greeted them warmly. "It's so good to see you," he'd say with a genuine smile. He never brought up their long absences, never criticized their lack of attention. Instead, he asked about their lives, listened with interest, and offered thoughtful advice when they needed it. Even when they forgot his birthday one year, he didn't let it harden his heart. He simply sent a message: "I hope you're all doing well. I miss you." At first, nothing changed. But over time, something remarkable happened. His children began to notice his unwavering kindness, his quiet strength. They saw that despite everything, he remained the same loving father they had always known. Slowly, they started calling more, visiting longer, and engaging in deeper conversations. It wasn't because he guilted them into it. It was because they respected the way he carried himself, the grace with which he handled their neglect. His patience, his dignity, and his warmth became a silent lesson in how to treat others. The key lesson here is simple. If you want your children to respect you, show them what respect looks like. If you want them to listen, listen to them. If you want them to value you, value yourself. If you treat them with kindness, even when they fall short, they will eventually learn to return it. It may take time, and they may not change overnight, but the impact of your example is lasting. Instead of demanding respect, embody it. Your actions will speak louder than any words ever could, and in time, your children may begin to mirror the very qualities they once took for granted. 6. Stay financially independent. As you grow older, one of the most powerful ways to maintain dignity and respect, both for yourself and from your children, is to stay financially independent. It's natural to hope that your children will take care of you as you age, but relying too heavily on them for financial support can create tension, resentment, and even a shift in how they perceive you. Independence, on the other hand, commands respect. When your children see that you are capable of managing your own affairs, they look up to you as someone strong and self-sufficient, rather than someone they have to take care of. Take the story of Mr. and Mrs. Carter, a retired couple in their 70s. After working hard their entire lives, they knew they had to be smart about their retirement. Instead of assuming their children would support them, they downsized their home, cut unnecessary expenses, and lived within their means. They carefully budgeted their savings, avoided debt, and made sure they had enough to cover their needs without asking their children for financial help. They never complained about money, never hinted that they needed assistance, and always seemed in control of their situation. At first, their children didn't fully appreciate their careful planning. But over time, they began to notice something remarkable. While many of their friends' parents were struggling financially or constantly asking for help, Mr. and Mrs. Carter never did. Instead, they remained independent, even offering financial wisdom to their children when they needed guidance. Their children respected them deeply, not just as parents, but as individuals who had taken full responsibility for their lives. Rather than becoming a burden, they became a source of inspiration. The lesson here is clear. Financial independence is more than just about money. It's about dignity. It's about showing your children, and yourself, that you are still capable, still in control, and still able to navigate life with confidence. This doesn't mean you should refuse help if you truly need it, but it does mean making an effort to manage your affairs as much as possible. Living within your means, avoiding unnecessary debt, and planning wisely for the future ensures that your children don't see you as a dependent, but as someone they can respect and admire. When you take control of your financial life, you not only protect yourself from stress and worry, but you also set an example for your children. You teach them responsibility, resilience, and the value of careful planning. And in doing so, you reinforce something even more important. Your worth is not measured by what you receive from others, but by how you stand strong on your own. 7. Forgive, but don't forget your worth. Forgiveness is one of the hardest yet most powerful things you can offer, especially when the people who hurt you are your own children. When they ignore you, fail to show appreciation, or treat you as if you are no longer important, it's natural to feel resentment. The pain of neglect can settle deep in your heart, making you question your own worth. But here's the truth: holding on to bitterness only hurts you. It weighs you down, steals your peace, and keeps you trapped in a cycle of disappointment. Forgiveness, however, sets you free. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting who you are or allowing disrespect to continue. It means releasing the anger while still valuing yourself enough to stand tall. Take the story of Mrs. Evelyn, a retired artist and mother of 2. Over the years, her daughter Claire had become distant, rarely calling, barely visiting. At first, Evelyn made excuses for her, thinking, "She's just busy. She'll come around." But as months passed with no word, the hurt deepened. She spent sleepless nights wondering what she had done wrong. One day, instead of drowning in sadness, she made a choice: not to forget, not to beg for attention, but to forgive and move forward. She wrote Claire a letter. "I love you. I miss you. And no matter what, I will always be here." Then, instead of waiting by the phone, she picked up her paintbrush and started painting again. She joined a local art group, displayed her work at community events, and found joy in pursuing her passion once more. Months later, Claire visited unexpectedly. Seeing her mother's artwork filling the room, she was surprised. "Mom, you've been painting again. Why didn't you tell me?" Evelyn simply smiled and said, "I've been focusing on what brings me joy." That visit marked a turning point. Claire began to visit more, not out of guilt, but out of admiration for her mother's quiet strength and independence. Evelyn's decision to forgive her daughter didn't mean she forgot the years of neglect. It meant she chose not to let them define her self-worth. The lesson here is clear. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, but it doesn't mean shrinking your value. It doesn't mean allowing disrespect or waiting endlessly for someone to change. It means choosing peace over anger, joy over resentment, and self-respect over desperation. If your children have hurt you, let go of the bitterness, but never let go of your dignity. Pursue what makes you happy, focus on your passions, and remember, you deserve love, but it must start with the love you give yourself. 8. Build a new circle of companionship. Loneliness is one of the most painful experiences of aging, especially when the people you expected to be there, your own children, become distant. You may have spent years believing that family would always be your source of companionship, but what happens when they are too busy with their own lives? When their visits become infrequent and their calls grow shorter? It's easy to fall into sadness, to feel forgotten. But here's a truth that will change everything. You don't have to wait for them to bring companionship into your life. You have the power to build a new circle of friendship, support, and joy. Take the story of Mr. Harold, a widowed man in his 80s. For years, he relied solely on his children for emotional support. Every week, he waited for a visit, a call, some sign that they still cared. But the visits became rare, the phone barely rang, and soon he found himself alone in his house, wondering if this was how the rest of his life would be. One evening, after another long day of solitude, Harold made a decision. He would not spend his remaining years waiting for others to make him feel valued. The next morning, he joined a local seniors club. At first, he was hesitant, unsure of what to expect. But as the weeks passed, something incredible happened. He made new friends. He shared stories, laughed, and even joined a walking group. Soon, his days were filled with activities he enjoyed: morning coffee gatherings, book club meetings, and day trips with his new friends. Something else changed too: his mindset. He no longer sat by the phone, waiting for his children to call. And ironically, as he built a fulfilling life outside of them, his children started to notice. His son called one day, surprised at how lively and happy his father sounded. "Dad, you seem different. What's going on?" Harold chuckled and replied, "I've been busy." That conversation led to more calls, more visits, but this time, they weren't out of guilt. They were out of genuine admiration. His children saw him not as a lonely old man, but as someone who was still vibrant, still living. The lesson is simple: loneliness fades when you build connections beyond family. If your children are distant, don't let their absence define your happiness. Seek out people who bring you joy: friends, neighbors, community groups. Join clubs, volunteer, take up a new hobby. A fulfilling social life is not a replacement for family, but it fills the gaps, brings laughter, and restores purpose. When you choose to live fully, you stop depending on others to make you feel worthy. And in doing so, you regain not just companionship, but a life truly worth living. In the end, life is too short to sit in silence, waiting for someone else to make you feel valued. You have given so much love, so much sacrifice, and now, as you enter this stage of life, you deserve peace, respect, and fulfillment. But here's the truth: those things do not come from waiting for others to give them to you. They come from within. They come from the choices you make every single day. You are not powerless. You are not forgotten. You are still here, still capable, still worthy of a life filled with joy, purpose, and dignity. Think about the stories you've heard today. Mr. Tanaka, who learned that his worth wasn't defined by a phone call. Mrs. Elena, who found happiness in her garden and unknowingly drew her children back to her. Mr. Peterson, who used the power of kind words instead of anger to restore a broken connection. Mrs. Rosa, who finally set boundaries and regained her son's respect. Mr. Lorenzo, who led by example and watched his children follow his kindness. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, who maintained financial independence and gained admiration instead of burden. Mrs. Evelyn, who forgave but never let go of her own worth. And Mr. Harold, who refused to let loneliness control his life and built a new circle of friendship. What do they all have in common? They took control of their own happiness. They didn't beg, chase, or sit in resentment. They made a choice to live fully, regardless of who was or wasn't showing up for them. And that's the challenge I leave you with today. Will you keep waiting, or will you start living? Will you let anger, sadness, or loneliness define your days, or will you take even one small step toward a more fulfilling life? Maybe that step is as simple as picking up a hobby you once loved. Maybe it's reaching out to an old friend, joining a local group, or taking a peaceful walk to remind yourself of the beauty still left in life. Maybe it's choosing to communicate with love instead of resentment. Maybe it's finally setting a boundary and reclaiming your dignity. Whatever it is, choose something. Choose you. Because your worth is timeless. It is not measured by how often your children call or how many people visit. It is measured by how much you choose to embrace this life that is still yours to live. So stand tall, take a deep breath, and step forward, not in waiting, but in strength. Because the best chapters of your life, they're not behind you. They're still waiting to be written.